Saw a question posed to James Aspey on his Instagram just lately. James Aspey was asked, what type of vegan activism are you doing lately? And his answer was, I made this post on Facebook and now I'm answering questions. He's answering questions that people provided below and in response to the image he posted on Facebook. And the image is of him eating sushi in a state of undress, showing off his horribly mistranslated Chinese tattoos. No matter how much or how little money these people are donating to James Aspey, in that case, the budget is unknown. Do you think he could bring about the same outcomes for half as much money? The most recent figures I've seen for the vegan activist organization DxE, Direct Action Everywhere, $800,000 per year. Those are somewhat out of date. It's quite possible they're now over $1 million per year. So the level of public support has been growing. When you think about what DxE did in the last year, do you think you could get that done for $400,000 instead of $800,000 if we just took the budget and cut it in half? Conversely, how much more do you think DxE would accomplish if people donated twice as much money? James Aspey, same question. I'll give you my opinion. I think they'd accomplish exactly the same amount if they had half as much money or twice as much money. Right? So this is both a sort of technical and bureaucratic element of politics, but it's also an ethical element of politics. And it touches us directly in a small movement like veganism, where so much of what we do is donation-driven. It's also part of the critique of how bureaucracies, state bureaucracies, school bureaucracies like large universities, how they spend money when they're given a bottomless budget, when they do bottomless fundraising, when they do zero-base budgeting, zero-base fundraising. Okay, so we're going to talk this through briefly. Sorry to say, I mean, it really is a profound element of life in the 21st century, as well as a practical concern when you're talking to these people face-to-face. And I think there are many people in this audience right now, even if only 500 people see this video, I'm not joking, there are people in this audience who speak to James Aspey. There are people in this audience who speak to the leaders of Direct Action Everywhere. I know. There are people here who are much less than 7 degrees of separation removed from the different examples we're using here, and other examples that are just as valid that due to time constraints are not being mentioned. Right? One final example where I'm very directly aware of the costs and budgeting involved. There's a well-known YouTube channel run by a guy named Dr. Greger. All right? To my knowledge, his budget is now in excess of $2 million US per year. The last YouTube video I made about him, I had the annual report from the year before, which is $1.5 million US. Do you think that you could do the same job he's doing here on YouTube for just $1 million? For 50%, for half the budget? Conversely, switched around. What if we double his budget? What if we raise it to $4 million? How would that change the outcome? How would that change the product? Okay, I'm 100% confident that I can do everything James Aspey does for less than half the price. I'm 100% confident I can do everything that Dr. Greger does here on YouTube for much, much less than $1 million per year. All right? Now, when it comes to DxE, Direct Action Everywhere, this is why I'm going to talk this through in a little bit of detail. All right? There are some real costs. All right? One of the things Direct Action Everywhere does is host conferences. Hosting a conference costs money, right? I proposed to my followers and friends and colleagues here on YouTube a couple years ago that I host a conference. I had a little bit of money in the bank. I was willing to pay for it entirely out of my own pocket, all right? Now, let's say we're talking about hosting a conference here in Victoria, BC, Canada. I was going to say Vancouver, but why should I take the ferry? Why should I travel? Okay, let's say we're going to host a conference here. And let's say I propose a budget and I ask you in my audience for donations. Let's say I propose a budget of $5,000. But we're doing this as project-specific funding. It's not zero-base budgeting. It's not bottomless fundraising where I say donate as much as possible, right? So I'm setting out an itemized list of why this costs $5,000. Let's just say, let me just pause and note, in Toronto, I was involved with conferences that were organized. I think they had a budget of $500. I mean, I've been involved in some very, very humble conferences where the total budget is very, very little, and that is also possible, right? But let's suppose that when you actually budget this out, when you actually have project-specific funding, we say, this is what I want to accomplish for $5,000, it's possible I would even say something specific and say, you know what, there's something else we wanted to do, but that would cost $10,000. And someone might get in touch with me and say, you know what, I see your vision. I see that for an extra $5,000, you can rent a sports stadium. Actually, we do have a sports stadium here in Victoria that's empty about 320 days a year. It's a real example. So you know what? You can hold this in the sports. I think that's a great idea. It's a terrible idea. But hypothetically, someone might see a specific item and they might say, look, they have an extra $5,000. They want to pay for that goal. They think that's a better way to do it. But you know what else happens? You also get economization in praxis. Someone might be looking at the budget that's proposed and say, hey, look, you're looking at spending $3,000 out of the $5,000 just on renting this space at a hotel. The space where the conference is going to happen. Like an actual boardroom type of setting in a hotel or whatever. And they say, you know what? Their family owns a big building here. Let's say it's a barn. Let's say they have an abandoned barn. Say, you know what? For just $1,000, why don't we just spend $1,000 on IKEA furniture? Let's just furnish this barn for the conference and do the conference there, and not do it at this hotel. And there could be a savings, and it could be charming. There could be opportunities to save money that come out, right? And I didn't attend personally. I've seen vegan conferences that were literally held in barns, that were held in abandoned factories. It can be done. There's no lower limit to the cost for these things, which is also why it's worth asking, could you do this for half as much money? Very often the answer is yes, with maybe some inconveniences. If we hold this in a barn, where are we going to go to a bathroom? Maybe that's why it costs $1,000 rather than nothing. They have to pay for portable toilets. Maybe there's some money that needs to be spent to make the barn viable. Maybe they have to set up some heating. I don't know. We're not going to get too deep into details, okay? But what I notice, and this is the sense in which bottomless fundraising is profoundly corrupting to human nature. It's profoundly corrupting to these projects in practice. All of the conferences I know of that Direct Action Everywhere hosted, they ask people to donate to attend. They ask people to donate to participate. They ask people to pay money to be one of the speakers. Whereas when I was when I was organizing a conference and when other people invited me to speak at their conferences, the discussion was always about the speakers or the participants being paid, right? Most notably, the cost of airplane tickets, maybe something for the hotel. So if I'm invited to participate in a conference in Europe, which has happened once since this channel started, the discussion was about them paying for my airplane ticket, them paying for my hotel room. When I was invited to participate in a conference in New York City, it's about them paying me, not me donating money to them, right? Whereas DxE, because they're fundraising all the time against a bottomless budget, against an infinite horizon, right? They're turning this into a fundraising opportunity without really realizing it, all right? Project-based funding. It might not seem like a standard of moral purity, but what's built into this is precisely a deadline, an objective, a standard of adequacy, a standard of success or failure. When you have a finite project, a finite budget you're raising money for, you know how much is enough. This is of profound ethical importance. Dr. Greger is asking for more donations right now, and nobody except me has stood up and said, $2 million is enough. How will he know? How will he know when he has enough? If you keep giving him more money, he'll find ways to spend it. And, again, let's be self-critical here. If I were stupid enough to do bottomless bottomless fundraising for a conference, and people gave me $100,000, I might feel like now I'm in a position where I have to find a way to spend that money, And for a lot of people, psychologically, it's more slippery than that. They just think I'm going to raise as much money as possible, and then I'm going to make this event as big and impressive as possible. Government bureaucrats do this also, right? How much money are you going to give NASA, whether it's a scientific research organization or a university? They get into the mindset of raising as much money as possible and then spending that money, often in ostentatious ways, often in counterproductive ways, to show you where the money went. Like, oh yeah, people donated all this money, so we had a fireworks display. It really does go into stuff like that. People gave us all this money, so we decided to do something ostentatious so we could try to appear in the newspaper or on the TV news or something, right? We started to get the mentality of, if people donated $100,000 to us, it perverts fundamentally the goal why this conference was being held in the first place, right? There's some other function there, okay? And I would say that's happened already with the three examples I've given you of Dr. Greger, of Direct Action Everywhere, and of James Aspey, okay? If human nature were perfect, this is a more difficult question to ask, what would happen when those groups doing the fundraising said, we have enough? I was in that position. I did a fundraiser, and I had thousands of dollars pouring in within just 24 hours. And I stopped the fundraiser. I stopped the fundraiser the minute it got to enough. And I later had to regret that because the exchange rate changed and so on. Like, it was so close to being enough to pay the lawyer's fees. I was like, okay, I should have let it go for another $500 or something. And all kinds of people said to me, oh, you're crazy. You could have gotten another $10,000. I mean, donations were pouring in and there was public excitement. There was hype here on YouTube. People were willing to really donate a lot of money for this. Okay. I didn't want a lot of money. All right. I wanted enough. Right? There was a specific function, there was a specific court case, a specific cost attached to that I was trying to pay for, right? No more and no less. And there shouldn't be any ethical question of how would that court case have gone if you paid twice as much money or half as much money, so on and so forth, all right? If people were perfectly moral, what would James Aspey do with the money you're donating to him right now? And he doesn't disclose how much money he's getting. And it may be very humble. I don't know if he's getting $500 a month or $5,000 a month or whatever it may be. I don't know. But as soon as we know what his project is, what it is you're donating for, if you're building a bridge, let's find out how much the bridge costs. Let's find out when it's built. And then we can cut the ticker tape and celebrate that the bridge is over with, right? The problem is when you are funding the permanent vacation lifestyle, the budget is bottomless. There is no measurable outcome. We're into an economic and ethical realm where we're dealing with the infinitude of human greed and self-indulgence, right? As opposed to the finitude of trying to accomplish something in a specific project, right? I know it's appealing to imagine that you've embarked on some mission like feeding starving hordes of orphans. And believe me, in places like Cambodia and Laos, I've seen projects that had ostensible goals that were that infinite and engaged in bottomless fundraising accordingly. And it corrupted them also. There is a famous case. I can probably Google around and give you guys a link to an article here. It's a famous case of a woman in Cambodia who started a shelter for female victims of sexual slavery. So these were, in theory, girls who were somehow abducted and forced into prostitution. And the story she pitched, because ultimately a lot of this fundraising takes place on the internet, 21st century, the story she pitched had a bunch of strange question marks in it. if you know anything about Cambodia, there were a number of things that make you raise an eyebrow and think that doesn't quite sound possible, or that timeline doesn't quite add up. And sooner or later, an investigative reporter, one of the last investigative journalists on earth, went through and proved that every single claim this woman made about her own life was false. That in fact she had never been a prostitute, she had never been a victim of international trafficking, and all of the details at every stage of the story were false. Now, how much money was she raising? What was the objective? Infinite. How many victims of sex trafficking are there in Cambodia? By the way, I know a scientist who did research on that, quantifying it. The real answer is very finite indeed. You're not talking about an infinite number of victims of a social problem like that. It's a very finite number you can estimate. It's research nobody wants to read. But from their perspective, infinite. If you give us $10,000, we'll find a way to spend $10,000. If you give us $100,000, they'll find a way to spend $100,000. And again, even examples like Dr. Greger, he soon enough got up to millions per year. Millions per year doing what? I hope you guys question it. Then there was a next step of this scandal, because, of course, defenders of this charity said, well, maybe this particular woman who founded the charity and asked for donations, maybe she herself was a fraud. But she must have helped countless victims of sexual slavery, sex trafficking, prostitution. And when the books were finally opened up, there were criminal charges involved here and so on, the answer was 0. There wasn't even one example of one girl or one woman who had ever been helped by this charity who had any history of being sexually trafficked or even just being a prostitute. Okay. Maybe we're predisposed to believe in this mode of donating money with no stated outcome, no particular deadline, no particular project that the project manager is responsible to or answer to. Maybe we're conditioned to accept it because of the last 1,000 years of Christianity, right? When you donate to the church, what are you donating for? To build something in particular? There's always something to build. To pay for some priest to eat lunch or dinner? There's always some priest who needs his belly filled, right? There's always some orphan somewhere the church can suggest to you that your donations, but there's always some good work somewhere, and no one wants to actually sit down and evaluate when you pay the church. Where does your money go? What are you really bankrolling? And the fundamental question is, when will it stop? When will enough be enough? And the answer is only when people like you and I stand up and say, this is enough.